So now moving on to inheritance patterns from meiosis. Well, in order to understand it better, it's important to understand the basic information. So there's two types of chromosomes. There's autosomal chromosomes and sex-linked chromosomes. Autosomal chromosomes are chromosomes 1 to 22, and sex-linked chromosomes occur on chromosome 23, also known as the X and Y chromosomes.
So you can have various different types with your chromosomes. So like you could be homozygous or heterozygous for your autosomal chromosomes, where homozygous are when you have both dominant or both recessive alleles, and heterozygous is where you have one dominant and one recessive. For sex-linked, it's a little bit different. Females, because they have two X chromosomes, have the same characteristics as like homozygous, heterozygous, as with the autosomal, but males, because they only have one X chromosome, they are considered hemizygous. So now we're going to move on to pedigrees. We're going to look at different types of inheritance patterns, starting with an autosomal recessive trait. So as you can see here, we have two carrier parents, which means that they are heterozygous for the trait. So if we use A's, they would all be big A, little a. But because it's recessive, they do not exhibit the trait. And from there, we can look at their children. So because this male is shaded in, he is affected. And this female, because she's only half shaded in, she's a carrier, just like her parents. And this female is unaffected completely. So that means that this male is homozygous recessive, so little a. This female is homozygous dominant, and this female is also heterozygous. So then to figure out a probability, like if they were to have another child, what is the probability that that child will also have the disease, we could do a Punnett square to figure out the probability. And then also another characteristic of an autosomal recessive mode of inheritance is the fact that the disease normally skips a generation. So for example, the parent generation here, both of these parents are unaffected, but they have affected children, so that can be seen as the skipping a generation, which is common in recessive modes of inheritance.
Now we're going to move on to autosomal dominant inheritance, and basically what that means is that when you have just one dominant allele, that means that that trait will get expressed. You don't need to have two, like recessive, to be shown. So for example, to start off, this is an affected female, so that could be a big A, little a, or it could be a big A, because either way, you're going to show the trait because you have at least one dominant allele. Here you have an unaffected male, and you know that that needs to be homozygous recessive, because if it's dominant, it would override. So it would be two lowercase a's, would have to be this. So moving on from the first generation to the second generation, you can tell that the children, the ones in the purple, are both affected. And the only way they're both going to be affected is if they each carry at least one dominant allele. And that won't be possible if you have this genotype for the mom, because that means that you have a probability of getting a recessive allele in the children. So that means that the mom has to be capital A, and the dad has to be lowercase a. So then when you draw your Punnett square, it would be capital A, lowercase a, which gives you 100% chance of a heterozygous genotype, and that's what the children are. And the ones next to them are just who they're married to. And moving on to third generation, you can also see that the children here there's one affected, and then there's one that's not affected, and here it's the same thing. There's a 50% chance of being affected, 50% chance of not being affected. And the only way that's going to happen, again, would be if the children are heterozygous, and the others are homozygous recessive. And this is why this would be an autosomal dominant trait example.